What do you truly desire? What fantasies are flickering in the depths of your mind at this very moment? Don't be afraid to acknowledge them, to drag them out of the shadows and into the light. For desire may be a labyrinth, but it is also a compass, pointing us towards our truest callings. Desire has been harnessed by the engines of consumerism, exploited by the algorithms of advertising. Our wants are manufactured, our longings commodified, our identities reduced to brands and labels. In a world of endless choice and instant gratification, we are left curiously unfulfilled, forever chasing the next dopamine hit. And yet amidst this landscape of manipulation and disenchantment, desire remains our most potent ally. For it is in the crucible of our wanting that we forge our authenticity, that we discover what truly matters to us. As the existentialists understood, desire is the expression of our radical freedom, the manifestation of our will to create meaning in an absurd universe. Desire is also the source of our greatest suffering, the root of our attachments and aversions. As the Buddha taught in the Four Noble Truths, the origin of suffering is attachment to desires. We cling to what we want, recoiling from what we fear, trapped in a cycle of craving and dissatisfaction. This paradox of desire, at once our salvation and our damnation, has preoccupied philosophers and spiritual traditions for centuries. In Plato's Symposium, desire is portrayed as a lack, a yearning for wholeness that drives us towards beauty, wisdom, and the eternal forms. Our desires are often opaque to us, buried in the depths of the unconscious, tangled in a web of repression and sublimation. We are driven by forces we scarcely understand, compelled by impulses we struggle to control. As Cicero said, the thirst of desire is never filled, nor fully satisfied. This is Irrevelato, a channel dedicated to revealing the hidden connections in cultural and religious history, the secrets you deserve to know. Today we give shape to desire with a systemic approach. Is it an egoic motive? Is it a biological impulse for survival? An emotional response? No matter the answer, the only certainty is your own perception of your own desires. Give light to your wishes. Delve into them until the essence reveals itself. Before we begin this journey, I want to thank you for being here. Your support is greatly appreciated. Check out the description for additional information and ways to engage. So, back to you, dear reader. Ask yourself once more, what do you truly desire? Now then, said Socrates, say whether love desires the object of his love. Certainly, said Agathon. Is it when he has what he desires and loves that he desires and loves it, or when he has not? Most likely, when he has not. Come now, said Socrates, let us run over again what has been agreed. Love is, first of all, of something. Next, of things which one lacks. Yes, he said. Well, now it has been agreed that he loves what he lacks and has not. Yes. In the Symposium, Plato presents desire, eros, as a lack or deficiency that motivates the soul's ascent toward the form of beauty. As Socrates relates from his conversation with Diotima, he who would proceed rightly in this matter should begin in youth to turn to beautiful bodies. First, if his guide lead him aright, he should love one such body only, and therein he should engender beautiful converse. This desire for beauty begins with physical attraction, but gradually transcends to a love of wisdom, and ultimately to a comprehension of beauty itself. In the Republic, Plato incorporates desire into his tripartite theory of the soul. He identifies the appetitive part as the seat of bodily cravings and material desires, which must be governed by the rational part to achieve a just and harmonious soul. In heaven's name, then, what part is it, and in what sense is it one of the three, that would lead us to describe a man as self-disciplined or undisciplined? Plato emphasizes the importance of properly habituating and educating desires to align with reason and virtue. However, Plato argues that even this fundamental desire ultimately aims at the good. The soul of every human being necessarily desires the good and does everything for its sake. In the Phaedrus, desire manifests as two horses, one noble and one base, which the charioteer, which symbolizes reason, must guide. This metaphor illuminates how desire can either elevate or degrade the soul, depending on its direction and management. In the Philebus, Plato examines the relationship between desire and pleasure. He argues that desire always involves some awareness of lack. When emptied, we desire repletion, and when experiencing it, we feel pleasure. Plato's theory emphasizes that desire invariably indicates an absence of something, as clearly stated in the Symposium. He maintains that all desire ultimately aims at the good, a point he develops extensively in the Republic. The philosopher argues that desires possess inherent worth, with some being nobler than others. Aristotle further develops the idea of desire as a source of motivation and action. In De Anima, he identifies desire as one of the fundamental powers of the soul, alongside perception and thought. Desire for Aristotle is the force that drives both human and animal motion and is intricately bound up with practical reasoning about ends. That which moves, therefore, is a single faculty, and the faculty of desire. In the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle develops this naturalistic understanding of desire by connecting it to his theory of human flourishing. He writes, "The good has been well described as that at which everything aims." Unlike Plato's view of desire as lack, Aristotle sees desire as a natural directing force that, when properly guided by reason, leads humans toward their telos, or natural end. Aristotle identifies three distinct types of desire in De Anima: appetite, spirit or passion, and rational wish. He explains, desire takes three forms: wish, spirit, and appetite. Each form of desire plays a specific role in human motivation and behavior. Appetite seeks immediate pleasure, spirit responds to perceived honor and shame, while rational wish aims at what reason determines to be good. The relationship between desire and practical reason is central to Aristotle's ethical theory. In De Motu Animalium, he argues that desire and reason work together in producing human action. Thought by itself moves nothing, but only thought directed to an end and concerned with action. This cooperation between desire and reason becomes crucial in his account of moral development and virtuous action. In the Rhetoric, Aristotle further explores how desires shape human behavior and social interaction. He observes that desires are intimately connected to pleasure and pain. Let pleasure be a certain motion of the soul, and a settling all at once and perceptibly into its natural state, and pain the opposite. This understanding of desire's relationship to pleasure becomes fundamental to his theory of human motivation. Aristotle's psychological realism is evident in his recognition that desires can conflict with reason and with each other. In the Nicomachean Ethics, he acknowledges that the incontinent person acts from appetite, not from choice, while the continent person, on the contrary, acts from choice, not from appetite. He argues that proper habituation of desires is essential for virtue. Hence, we ought to have been brought up in a particular way from our very youth, as Plato says, so as both to delight in and to be pained by the things that we ought. For Aristotle, desire is deeply connected to his broader metaphysical and biological theories. In his view, desire serves as the bridge between cognition and action, between theoretical understanding and practical behavior. As he states in De Anima, these two things appear to be sources of movement, desire, and practical thought. In the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle argues that desire should be guided by virtue, which involves finding the mean between excess and deficiency in our emotions and actions. The temperate person, for example, desires pleasures in the right way, at the right time, and in the right amount. This understanding of desire as something to be moderated and directed by reason has been highly influential in moral philosophy. The theme of desire as a potential threat to rational self-control is also central to the work of the Dutch philosopher Baruch Spinoza. In his work, The Ethics, Spinoza argues that desire is the very essence of human nature, the fundamental striving to persevere in being. However, when we are in the grip of the passions, we are driven by inadequate ideas and external causes, leading to bondage and suffering. The path to freedom, for Spinoza, lies in the cultivation of adequate ideas and the intellectual love of God, which allows us to understand the necessity of all things and achieve a kind of blessedness. This involves a transformation of our desires as we come to see ourselves as part of the infinite and eternal substance of the universe. Spinoza's conception of desire emerges from his broader metaphysical system, developed geometrically in the Ethics. Within his monistic framework, where God or nature is the only substance, desire represents the fundamental striving that characterizes all modes of being. Each thing, as far as it can by its own power, strives to persevere in its being. This universal striving becomes desire in humans when accompanied by consciousness. Spinoza explains, desire is appetite with consciousness of the appetite. In the short treatise on God, man, and his well-being, an earlier work prefiguring the Ethics, Spinoza begins developing his understanding of desire as a fundamental force. Desire, which consists in the striving whereby each thing strives to achieve its preservation, depends on the essence of the thing itself. This connection between desire and essence becomes fully articulated in the Ethics. Spinoza's theory of desire is inseparable from his theory of affects or emotions. In Ethics 3, he describes how desire interacts with joy and sadness to produce the full range of human emotional life. From these three, joy, sadness, and desire, arise and are composed all other affects. This tripartite foundation of emotional life represents a significant simplification of traditional accounts of the passions. The political implications of Spinoza's theory of desire appear in his theological political treatise, where he argues that human desires must be understood rather than condemned. I have labored carefully not to mock, lament, or detest human actions, but to understand them. Spinoza's theory differs markedly from both Platonic and Christian traditions that view desire as a sign of imperfection. Instead, he writes, desire which arises from reason can have no excess. This positive evaluation of desire, when guided by reason, represented shift in philosophical thinking about human nature. The therapeutic dimension of Spinoza's theory emerges in his discussion of the intellectual love of God. He argues that understanding the true nature of our desires leads to freedom and blessedness. The more we understand particular things, the more we understand God. Desire is one of the most potent forces driving human behavior and shaping our individual and collective realities. Two esoteric philosophies that delve deeply into the mysteries of desire are Hermeticism and chaos magic. The Hermetic texts emerged during the Hellenistic and Roman periods, blending Greek philosophical traditions with Egyptian religious elements. While traditionally attributed to the mythical figure Hermes Trismegistus, scholars date most surviving Hermetic texts to the first few centuries of the Christian era. The core tenets are encapsulated in the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, which includes the famous maxim, "As above, so below, as within, so without." In Hermetic thought, desire is seen as a creative force that shapes reality through the power of imagination. For everything which is an object of desire generates also imagination to grasp it, and thus imagination becomes the creator of the world. The Corpus Hermeticum states, "The soul is made of life and mind, as God is the maker of life and mind, and like always delights in like. Thus the soul delights in life and mind delights in God, life strives to mind, God strives to life." Hermeticism teaches that our thoughts and desires have a tangible existence as thought forms, which can influence both our inner world and the external universe. As the Kybalion, a modern Hermetic text, explains, thought may be non-physical, but it is still substantial and has the power to create and destroy. Consciously directing our desires and imagination, we can tap into the creative potential of thought forms to manifest our goals and transform our lives. If then you do not make yourself equal to God, you cannot apprehend God, for like is known by like. In other words, we must elevate our consciousness and align our desires with the divine will to truly harness their power. Chaos magic is a contemporary magical practice that emerged in the 1970s, drawing upon a wide range of occult traditions, including Hermeticism, Thelema, and Discordianism. Its central premise is that belief is the ultimate tool for shaping reality, and that by consciously manipulating our beliefs, we can alter the fabric of existence itself. In chaos magic, desire is seen as the fuel that propels the engine of belief. As Peter J. Carroll, one of the founders of chaos magic, writes in Liber Null and Psychonaut, the force which initiates all magical action is the power of the self to transform its drives and desires. Chaos magicians use techniques such as sigil magic, which involves encoding a specific desire into a symbol and charging it with energy through gnosis, altered states of consciousness, to manifest their intentions. They also employ reality tunnels, deliberately adopting different belief systems to shift their perceptions and create new possibilities. Ultimately, chaos magic teaches that we are the creators of our own reality, and that by embracing the fluid nature of belief and desire, we can become reality artists, sculpting the world according to our will. 9. As Phil Hine, another prominent chaos magician, states, magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. By recognizing the creative power of our thoughts and beliefs, and consciously aligning our desires with higher purposes, we can tap into the transformative potential within us. However, these traditions also caution against the dangers of unrestrained desire and the importance of self-knowledge and ethical responsibility. As the divine Pythagoras warns, for many, carried away by the pleasures of the body, have neglected the knowledge of God and have perished. In the end, the key to mastering desire lies in understanding its nature, cultivating wisdom and discernment, and using its power wisely in service of our highest aspirations. By doing so, we can become co-creators of a reality that reflects the beauty, truth, and goodness of the divine within us all. Hinduism is a diverse and ancient religion that originated in the Indus Valley civilization, encompassing a wide range of philosophical schools and spiritual practices. At the core of Hindu thought is the concept of dharma, the cosmic law that governs the universe, and the moral and ethical principles that guide human behavior. In Hindu philosophy, desire is seen as one of the four goals of human life, along with righteousness, prosperity, and liberation. The Kama Sutra, a classical Hindu text on the art of love, states, "Kama is the enjoyment of appropriate objects by the five senses of hearing, feeling, seeing, tasting, and smelling, assisted by the mind together with the soul." Hinduism also recognizes the double-edged nature of desire. When desires are unrestrained and not aligned with dharma, they can lead to suffering and perpetuate the cycle of reincarnation. The Bhagavad Gita, a sacred Hindu scripture, warns, when a man thinks of the objects of sense, attachment to them is produced. From attachment, longing is born, and from longing, anger arises. From anger comes delusion. From delusion, loss of memory. From loss of memory, the destruction of intelligence, and from the destruction of intelligence, he perishes. The key to liberation, according to Hindu thought, lies in the practice of yoga, which aims to still the fluctuations of the mind and detach from worldly desires. As the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali state, yoga is the suppression of the modifications of the mind. The Bhagavad Gita, a sacred Hindu text, states, "When a man has mastered himself, he is perfectly at ease in cold, in heat, in pleasure or pain, in honor or disgrace." This mastery does not imply the elimination of desire, but rather the ability to channel its energy towards higher purposes. The Kama Sutra recognizes that sexual desire is a natural and essential part of the human experience. Rather than suppressing or denying desire, it provides guidance on how to cultivate and refine it in a way that enhances the overall quality of life. True pleasure arises from a deep connection between partners. It advises individuals to cultivate qualities such as confidence, charm, and sensitivity to create an atmosphere conducive to intimacy and enjoyment. While the Kama Sutra itself is not a tantric text, its teachings have influenced and been incorporated into tantric practices. Tantra is a spiritual tradition that seeks to harness sexual energy for spiritual growth and enlightenment. It views the union of male and female principles as a microcosm of the divine union of Shiva and Shakti, the cosmic principles of consciousness and energy. In tantric practices, the techniques and positions described in the Kama Sutra are used as a means to awaken the Kundalini energy and achieve higher states of consciousness. Tantric traditions also emphasize the importance of cultivating love, devotion, and reverence between partners, viewing sexual union as a sacred act that can lead to spiritual realization. Buddhism is a spiritual tradition that emerged in ancient India, based on the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. The Four Noble Truths, which form the foundation of Buddhist doctrine, identify desire as the root cause of suffering and outline the path to liberation, nirvana. According to Buddhist philosophy, all phenomena are characterized by three marks of existence: impermanence, suffering, and non-self. Desire arises from the illusion of a permanent, independent self and the craving for sensory pleasure, existence, and non-existence. The Buddha taught that the way to end suffering is by following the Eightfold Path, which includes right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. By practicing these principles and cultivating wisdom and compassion, an individual can extinguish the flames of desire and achieve nirvana, the state of ultimate peace and liberation. Just as a tree, though cut down, sprouts up again if its roots remain uncut and firm, even so, until the craving that lies dormant is rooted out, suffering springs up again and again. The streams of desire flow everywhere like a creeper sprouting forth. Seeing this creeper, when it has sprung up, cut off its root by means of wisdom. Buddhism emphasizes the importance of mindfulness and detachment in overcoming desire, recognizing its impermanent and unsatisfactory nature. Both Hinduism and Buddhism acknowledge the inherent human tendency towards desire. They also recognize its potential to cause suffering and obstruct the path to spiritual liberation. As the Buddha said, health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth, faithfulness the best relationship. In alchemical traditions, transmutation refers to the process of transforming base metals into gold, a metaphor for the transformation of the self from a state of ignorance and impurity to one of wisdom and enlightenment. This idea of inner transformation through the refinement and redirection of desire is a common theme across many spiritual and mystical traditions. The fulfillment of desire is the delight of all the world, whereby the imperfect thing is made like the perfect. Every joy goes hand in hand with this desire. The love of these two is hot. They are like bride and groom on their wedding day, from whose sweetest conjunction noble fruit will follow, for they are one flesh and one blood. This idea of desire as a sacred force to be harnessed and transmuted is echoed in the writings of the 20th century spiritual teacher Sri Aurobindo. In his work, The Life Divine, Aurobindo speaks of the transfiguration of desire as a key stage in the evolution of consciousness. Desire is the impurity of the prana, the life principle, and a cause of sin and suffering. But desire too can be transformed into a pure delight of being, which is an instrument of divine possession and perfect enjoyment. For Aurobindo, as for the alchemists, the goal is not to eradicate desire but to sublimate it, to redirect its energy from the pursuit of fleeting pleasures towards the realization of our highest nature. By tapping into the transformative power of desire, we can accelerate our own spiritual evolution, transmuting the lead of our lower impulses into the gold of divine consciousness. In Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical tradition, desire is seen as a reflection of the divine will that underlies creation. The task of the spiritual seeker is to align their own desires with this higher will, redirecting the energy of longing back towards its ultimate source. As the Zohar, a foundational text of Kabbalah, explains, the impulse of desire is the source of all that is holy and all that is not holy. If it is crowned above, this impulse of desire becomes the foundation of holiness. Similarly, in Sufism, the mystical branch of Islam, the concept of ishq represents the transformative power of spiritual desire. Ishq is often described as an all-consuming love for the divine that purifies the soul and dissolves the ego. The poetry of Sufi masters like Ibn Arabi and Rumi frequently uses the language of passionate longing to describe the journey towards unity with the beloved. As Rumi writes, the whole business of love is to drown in the sea. By opening ourselves to the depths of our longing, we may discover that what we truly desire is not any worldly object or attainment, but the eternal, the infinite, the divine within and around us. Desire lies at the heart of human sexuality, fueling our longing for intimacy, pleasure, and connection. At its core, desire is a powerful force that propels us towards objects, experiences, or people that we perceive as rewarding or pleasurable. In the realm of sexuality, desire manifests as a longing for physical and emotional intimacy, a craving for sensual pleasure, and a yearning for connection with another being. Sigmund Freud observed, "The libido is the driving force of all human activity and the source of all our instinctual desires." Freud's pioneering work on the psychosexual development of individuals highlighted the central role of desire in shaping our sexual identities and behaviors. It is also deeply influenced by psychological factors such as our early experiences, attachment patterns, and emotional needs. As the psychologist Esther Perel notes, desire is not just about sex, it's about longing, about connecting with the other, about the self that is reflected in the eyes of the beloved. One of the most fascinating and provocative aspects of erotic desire is its tendency to push against the boundaries of social norms and taboos. Throughout history, the objects and expressions of sexual desire have often been subject to moral judgments, legal restrictions, and cultural prohibitions. The truly erotic has nothing to do with staged sexuality or images created by society. The erotic is a measure between the beginnings of our sense of self and the chaos of our strongest feelings. It is an internal sense of satisfaction to which, once we have experienced it, we know we can aspire. For having experienced the fullness of this depth of feeling and recognizing its power, in honor and self-respect, we can require no less of ourselves, says Audre Lorde in her book Uses of the Erotic. Michel Foucault argued in his seminal work, The History of Sexuality, the very notion of sexual desire as a distinct and problematic aspect of human experience is a relatively recent invention, shaped by the rise of modern discourses on sexuality. Foucault's analysis reveals how the categorization and regulation of sexual desires have been used as tools of social control and power. Yet, despite or perhaps because of these attempts to constrain and suppress it, erotic desire has a way of continually resurfacing and expressing itself in transgressive and subversive ways. As the writer Anais Nin declared, the truly erotic is never correct, it is always elusive, underground, taboo. From the scandalous novels of the Marquis de Sade to the provocative films of directors like Luis Buñuel and Bernardo Bertolucci, the erotic imagination has long been drawn to the allure of the forbidden and the illicit. The eroticism of desire is inextricably bound up with questions of power, domination, and submission. In sexual relationships, the interplay of desires often involves a complex negotiation of roles, boundaries, and consent. These power dynamics are evident in the ways that certain desires and sexual practices are stigmatized or criminalized, while others are celebrated or normalized. The ongoing struggles for sexual and reproductive rights, equality, and sex worker advocacy all reflect the deeply political nature of desire and its regulation. In the Greco-Roman myth of Eros and Psyche, we find a powerful allegory for the soul's journey towards divine love. Psyche, a mortal woman of surpassing beauty, is both blessed and cursed by her allure, drawing the envy of gods and mortals alike. When Eros, the god of love, falls for her, he whisks her away to a secluded palace, visiting her only under the cover of darkness. "I am your husband," he tells her, "but an evil has been foretold to me of you, and I beg you to follow my bidding that no mischief may come of it." Psyche, consumed by curiosity and doubt, cannot resist the temptation to gaze upon her mysterious lover. One fateful night she takes up a lamp and beholds the sleeping form of Eros, the most beautiful of all the gods. But a drop of hot oil falls from the lamp, waking him, and he flees, leaving Psyche bereft and alone. Thus begins her long and arduous journey to win back her beloved, a journey that will take her to the very depths of the underworld and the heights of Olympus. Through her trials, Psyche embodies the archetypal heroine who must confront her own fears and weaknesses, proving her worth through acts of love and devotion. She is aided by forces both natural and divine: ants who sort an immense pile of seeds, a tower who speaks and offers counsel, an eagle of Zeus who bears her to the heights. In the end, her perseverance is rewarded, as she is granted immortality and united with Eros for all eternity, their love a shining beacon of hope and inspiration for all who follow in their footsteps. In the Egyptian myth of Isis and Osiris, we find a different expression of the archetypes of desire. Theirs is a story of love, loss, and the unquenchable desire for restoration and renewal. Osiris, the wise and just ruler of Egypt, is brutally murdered by his jealous brother Set, who scatters the pieces of his dismembered body throughout the land. Isis, consumed by grief and longing, sets out to gather the fragments of her beloved, her tears falling like the life-giving waters of the Nile. "I embraced the lifeless corpse of my brother and raised my voice in wailing," she declares in one ancient text. "I cried to the sovereign of the universe. I made supplication to the Almighty God. I made appeal to the powers of nature." Through her tireless efforts and powerful magic, Isis is able to restore Osiris to a semblance of life and conceive their son, Horus, the divine child who will one day avenge his father and reclaim the throne of Egypt. The myth of Isis and Osiris speaks to the deep human yearning for wholeness and immortality, the desire to triumph over the forces of darkness and decay that threaten to tear us apart. It is a story of the regenerative power of love, the capacity of the human spirit to find hope and meaning in the face of the most profound losses. As Osiris himself declares in the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead, "I am yesterday, today, and tomorrow, for I am born again and again. I am the divine hidden soul who creates the gods and gives sepulchral meals to the denizens of the deep, the place of darkness and of light." These archetypes resonate deeply with our own experiences of love and loss, the trials and triumphs of the heart's journey. Perhaps the answer lies in the very act of the quest itself, the willingness to embrace the transformative power of love, to face our fears and doubts with courage and perseverance. Like Psyche, we must be willing to descend into the depths of our own unconscious, to confront the shadows and illusions that obscure our true nature. Like Isis, we must be tireless in our efforts to gather up the scattered fragments of our lives, to find the threads of meaning and purpose that will weave them into a coherent whole. In the words of the Sufi poet Rumi, "The minute I heard my first love story, I started looking for you, not knowing how blind that was." Lovers don't finally meet somewhere. They're in each other all along. For in the end, it is love that makes us immortal. The lovers struggle with language because it has become an object of desire. The man who must talk to the woman he loves finds his eloquence is wasted. Why? Because he must speak about her to her. She is both the subject and the predicate. Between subject and predicate, eloquence founders. A true lover cannot speak because his passion appears to him as entirely unique, unprecedented. How then can it be captured in that old generalizing vocabulary? It was Sappho who first called Eros bittersweet. No one who has been in love disputes her. What does the word mean? Eros seemed to Sappho at once an experience of pleasure and pain. Here is contradiction, and perhaps paradox. To perceive this, Eros can split the mind in two. Why? The components of the contradiction may seem at first glance obvious. We take for granted, as did Sappho, the sweetness of erotic desire. Its pleasurability smiles out at us. But the bitterness is less obvious. There might be several reasons why what is sweet should also be bitter. There may be various relations between the two savors. Poets have sorted the matter out in different ways. Sappho's own formulation is a good place to begin tracing the possibilities. The relevant fragment runs, "Eros once again limb loosener whirls me sweet bitter, impossible to fight off, creature stealing up." Eros moves or creeps upon its victim from somewhere outside her. Desire then is neither inhabitant nor ally of the desirer, Foreign to her will, it forces itself irresistibly upon her from without. Eros is an enemy. Its bitterness must be the taste of enmity. That would be hate. Indeed, it is through the prism of metaphor, symbolism, and imagery that the ineffable and often paradoxical nature of desire finds its most potent articulation. As Lakoff and Johnson argue in Metaphors We Live By, metaphor is principally a way of conceiving of one thing in terms of another, and its primary function is understanding. The Song of Songs, one of the most ancient and celebrated texts of erotic poetry, abounds in metaphorical language that conflates the landscape of the body with the natural world. Your shoots are an orchard of pomegranates with all choicest fruits, henna with nard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with all trees of frankincense, myrrh and aloes, with all chief spices. Here, the beloved's body becomes a lush garden, a site of sensual abundance and delight, inviting the lovers, exploration and consumption. Metaphor's close companion in the poetics of desire is symbolism. As Baudelaire writes in Correspondences, perfumes, colors and sounds correspond. In the language of desire, symbols serve as a kind of correspondences, a secret code that links the sensory world to the realm of emotion and spirit. In Rumi's ecstatic poetry, the symbol of the wine and the cup frequently represents the intoxication of divine love. Every moment a new problem. He's annihilating all that's made. To make us know the meaning of the verse, I was a hidden treasure, and I desired to be known. Here, the wine symbolizes the overwhelming force of desire that shatters the ego and dissolves the boundaries between lover and beloved. Ezra Pound asserts in his Imagist Manifesto, "An image is that which presents an intellectual and emotional complex in an instant of time." Sappho's lyrics are a confession, a revelation of the poet's innermost feelings, her response to her world, her appraisal of her own place in it. Her images are clean, sharply defined and precise, a brief, close focus on a single moment, feeling or object. The poetry of Sappho, though surviving only in fragments, is renowned for its vivid and evocative imagery of desire. Like the sweet apple which reddens upon the topmost bough, atop on the topmost twig, which the pluckers forgot somehow, forget it not, nay, but got it not, for none could get it till now. In this fragment, the image of the unreachable apple becomes a poignant metaphor for the unattainable object of desire, the fruit that tantalizes but remains just out of reach. In the sonnet tradition, Shakespeare stands as a master of desire's poetic expression. His sonnets are a study in the complex experience of love and longing. In Sonnet 129, he captures the anguish and contradictions of desire, past reason hunted, and no sooner had, past reason hated, as a swallowed bait, on purpose laid to make the taker mad. Here, desire is figured as a kind of madness, a compulsive force that overwhelms reason, and leaves the lover in a state of tortured ambivalence. Ultimately, the poetics of desire serve to give shape and form to one of the most profound and universal of human experiences. Through the alchemy of metaphor, artists have sought to capture the essence of what it means to want, to yearn, to burn with the fever of love and longing. As Anne Carson writes in Eros the Bittersweet, desire moves. Eros is a verb. In the language of poetry and literature, this movement finds its most potent expression, testifying to the power of desire to inspire, to transform, and to shape the human imagination. The 20th century saw the rise of psychoanalytic approaches to desire, pioneered by Sigmund Freud and Jacques Lacan. Freud's theory of the unconscious posited that our deepest desires are often hidden from us, repressed by the ego and the demands of civilized society. Neurotic symptoms, dreams and slips of the tongue provide glimpses into this unacknowledged realm of yearning. Freud's model of the psyche, developed throughout his works from 1900 to 1939, underwent several significant revisions. In 3 essays on the theory of sexuality, he initially proposed libido as a central motivating force, but by beyond the pleasure principle and the ego and the id, he had substantially modified this view to include the death drive as another fundamental force. Contemporary psychoanalytic scholars like Peter Gay note that Freud himself repeatedly revised and questioned his theories, emphasizing their provisional nature. In his seminal work, 3 Essays on the Theory of Sexuality, he asserted that the behavior of a human being in sexual matters is often a prototype for the whole of his other modes of reaction in life. Central to Freud's conception of desire was the notion of the unconscious, where our most primal urges and fantasies hold sway. According to Freud, it is the clash between these unconscious desires and the demands of civilized society that gives rise to the various neuroses and psychopathologies that afflict the human condition. As he observed in Civilization and Its Discontents, it is impossible to overlook the extent to which civilization is built up upon a renunciation of instinct. Jung, Freud's erstwhile disciple and later rival, offered a more expansive and nuanced view of desire, one that encompassed not only the sexual drives, but also the deeper yearnings of the soul. For Jung, desire was intimately bound up with the process of individuation, the lifelong journey towards wholeness and self-realization. As he wrote in The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, the urge and compulsion to self-realization is a law of nature and thus of invincible power, even though its effect at the start is insignificant and improbable. A key aspect of Jung's psychology of desire was the concept of the shadow, those dark and rejected aspects of the self that we repress or deny. According to Jung, it is only by confronting and integrating the shadow that we can hope to achieve true wholeness and authenticity. In Ion, Researches into the Phenomenology of the Self, he observed that the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. Lacan, the French psychoanalyst and philosopher, took Freud's insights in a radical new direction, recasting desire in terms of language, symbolism, and the structures of the unconscious. For Lacan, desire emerges as a lack or absence in the symbolic order, the realm of language and culture that shapes our identities and social relations. As he famously put it in his seminar, The 4 Fundamental Concepts of Psychoanalysis, desire is a relation of being to lack. This lack is the lack of being properly speaking. It isn't the lack of this or that, but lack of being whereby the being exists. Lacan specifically defines desire as distinct from both need and demand. While need can be satisfied and demand can be fulfilled, desire persists precisely because it cannot be satisfied. It is constitutively endless. Desire's purpose is not to realize its goal, to find full satisfaction, but to reproduce itself as desire. The realization of desire does not consist in being fulfilled, but in the reproduction of desire as such. The realm of desire is infinite, because desire recognizes no boundaries, and its object is characterized mainly by the fact that it is non-existent, it is lost, or it was never possessed in the first place. In Lacan's view, our desires are always mediated by the other, the symbolic order of language and culture that precedes and exceeds us. We desire not only what we lack, but what we imagine the other desires of us. This complex interplay of desire and lack gives rise to the various tensions and conflicts that characterize human relationships and social interactions. As Lacan observed in The Direction of the Treatment and the Principles of its Power, man's desire is the desire of the other. Freud's emphasis on the libido and the unconscious laid the groundwork for a deeper understanding of the irrational and often conflicting forces that drive human behavior. Jung's concept of individuation and the integration of the shadow points to the transformative potential of desire, its role in the quest for self-realization and wholeness. Lacan's insights into the linguistic and symbolic dimensions of desire highlight the ways in which our innermost longings are shaped by the social and cultural contexts in which we are embedded. These thinkers share a common conviction that desire lies at the very core of the human experience, animating our dreams, our struggles, and our search for meaning in a world of uncertainty and change. Who am I? What do I want? How can I find fulfillment and authenticity? Learning to listen to the whispers of our own hearts, to honor the longings of our souls, we open ourselves up to the possibility of growth, transformation, and self-discovery. As Jung once observed, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. Gallagher and Zahavi have proposed a neurophenomenological approach that seeks to bridge the gap between the third-person perspective of neuroscience and the first-person perspective of phenomenology. This approach recognizes the irreducible complexity of desire as a multifaceted phenomenon that spans the biological, psychological, and experiential domains. As Frankl and Yalom have noted, the existential dimensions of these conditions often involve a profound disruption of the individual's sense of meaning, purpose, and self-transcendence. The brain's reward system is a complex network of neural circuits and neurochemical pathways that evolve to promote survival and reproduction by reinforcing adaptive behaviors and motivating the pursuit of beneficial stimuli. Research has revealed dopamine's complex role in reward processing. While initially thought to be simply a pleasure chemical, studies by Schultz demonstrated that dopamine neurons primarily respond to reward prediction errors rather than pleasure itself. Berridge and Robinson's work further distinguished between wanting, which is mediated by dopamine, and liking, mediated by opioid systems, challenging earlier simplified models of dopamine's function. The work of Kent Berridge and Terry Robinson on incentive salience theory has revolutionized our understanding of how the reward system functions and how it can be hijacked by addictive substances and behaviors. According to this theory, the reward system is composed of two distinct but interrelated components: wanting, the incentive salience, and liking, hedonic pleasure. While liking refers to the subjective experience of pleasure or enjoyment, wanting refers to the motivational drive or craving that propels an individual to seek out and pursue rewarding stimuli. Berridge and Robinson have shown that these two components are mediated by different neural substrates and can be dissociated under certain conditions. For example, studies have demonstrated that manipulations of dopamine signaling can selectively enhance wanting without necessarily increasing liking. This finding has important implications for understanding the nature of addiction, as it suggests that compulsive drug-seeking behavior may be driven more by sensitized wanting than by the subjective experience of pleasure. The role of dopamine in the reward system has been further elucidated by the work of Wolfram Schultz and colleagues, who have used electrophysiological recordings in primates to demonstrate that dopamine neurons encode reward prediction errors, the difference between expected and actual rewards. This research has shown that dopamine signaling is a learning signal that guides behavior by updating the value of stimuli and actions based on their outcomes. Research has shown that dopamine neurons respond not simply to rewards, but to the difference between expected and received rewards, what neuroscientists call reward prediction error. The insights from incentive salience theory and reward prediction error signaling have been synthesized into a comprehensive framework known as the incentive sensitization theory of addiction, developed by Robinson and Berridge. According to this theory, repeated exposure to addictive drugs or behaviors leads to a sensitization of the wanting system, resulting in exaggerated incentive salience attribution to drug-related cues and a compulsive drive to seek out and consume the drug, even in the face of adverse consequences. Studies showing that sensitization of the dopamine system can occur even in the absence of conscious awareness or subjective pleasure, and the drug-related cues can elicit powerful cravings and activate the reward system in the brains of addicted individuals. These findings underscore the importance of understanding the unconscious and irrational aspects of desire and the challenges of overcoming addiction through willpower or reasoning alone. Beyond the domain of addiction, the neuroscience of desire has also shed light on the broader mechanisms of motivation, decision-making, and goal-directed behavior. The work of Antonio Damasio and colleagues on the somatic marker hypothesis has highlighted the critical role of emotional and bodily signals in guiding behavior and shaping our desires and preferences. 8. According to this hypothesis, our decisions and actions are not solely the product of rational deliberation, but are also heavily influenced by the emotional and visceral markers that we associate with different options or outcomes. This perspective has been further elaborated by the work of Edmund Rolls and colleagues on the orbitofrontal cortex, a region of the prefrontal cortex that has been implicated in the representation of reward value and the updating of stimulus-reward associations. The orbitofrontal cortex is thought to play a critical role in integrating sensory, emotional, and cognitive information to guide decision-making and goal-directed behavior, and has been shown to be dysfunctional in a range of conditions characterized by impaired impulse control and excessive desire, such as addiction, compulsive disorders, and binge eating. The neuroscience of desire has also explored the complex interplay between motivation, pleasure, and pain, and the ways in which these experiences are modulated by social, cultural, and contextual factors. The work of Jamil Zaki on the social modulation of pain has demonstrated that the experience of pain is heavily influenced by social cues and expectations, and that the presence of supportive others can activate reward-related brain regions and reduce the subjective experience of pain. Similarly, the research of Torwager on the placebo effect has shown that the expectation of relief or reward can activate the brain's opioid and dopamine systems, leading to real physiological and behavioral changes. These findings highlight the power of belief and expectation in shaping our desires and experiences, and the importance of understanding the social and psychological context in which these processes unfold. Central to the phenomenological understanding of desire is the concept of intentionality, the idea that consciousness is always directed towards an object or state of affairs beyond itself. As Sartre and Levinas have argued, desire reveals the incompleteness and transcendence of human existence, the way in which we are always reaching beyond ourselves towards a future that is yet to be realized. This future orientation of desire is inextricably linked to its temporality, the way in which it unfolds over time and shapes our sense of past, present, and future. In the realm of existentialism and phenomenology, thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Maurice Merleau-Ponty have explored the lived experience of desire as an embodied and world-directed phenomenon. For Sartre, desire is intricately bound up with the project of human freedom and the anguish it entails. "We are condemned to be free," Sartre famously declared, "and our desires are expressions of the fundamental choices we make in creating ourselves and giving meaning to our lives." At the same time, desire can also be a source of self-deception, as we try to flee from our freedom into inauthentic modes of being like bad faith. Merleau-Ponty, in contrast, emphasized the bodily and perceptual dimensions of desire. In the phenomenology of perception, he describes desire as a kind of atmosphere or style of being in the world, an openness to the sensuous and affective qualities of experience. Desire is not just a mental state, but a way of inhabiting and engaging with our environment and other people. This phenomenological approach has been taken up by contemporary thinkers like Dan Zahavi and Sean Gallagher, who have explored the intersubjective and narrative aspects of desire. Desire, from this perspective, is not just an individual phenomenon, but a shared and socially mediated one, shaped by the stories and scripts we inherit from our culture. Sartre's analysis of desire appears primarily in Being and Nothingness, where he examines it within his broader theory of consciousness and freedom. While he emphasizes human freedom in the formation of desires, scholars like Christina Howells note that this should be understood within the context of his complex theory of consciousness and situation. Sartre acknowledges multiple conditioning factors while maintaining that human freedom remains irreducible. Contemporary existential psychologists like Irvin Yalom have developed clinical applications of these insights, while modifying some of Sartre's more extreme claims about absolute freedom. Sartre posits desire as a manifestation of humanity's radical freedom and the agonizing responsibility that accompanies it. Man is condemned to be free, he famously asserts. Condemned because he did not create himself, in other respect is free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. The existentialist does not believe in the power of passion. He will never agree that a sweeping passion is a ravaging torrent which fatally leads a man to certain acts and is therefore an excuse. He thinks that man is responsible for his passion. Our desires are expressions of the projects we choose for ourselves, the objectives we pursue to construct an identity and imbue our lives with purpose. As Sartre explains, to desire is to give oneself a future toward which one leaps. Yet lurking behind every desire is the harrowing awareness that we alone are responsible for these choices. We cannot escape the burden of our freedom. For Albert Camus, desire collides with the ultimate absurdity and meaninglessness of existence. In the myth of Sisyphus, he grapples with the predicament of the human being who yearns for clarity and reason in an unreasonable universe. Our desires for understanding, purpose and fulfillment are incessantly thwarted by the stony silence of a world divested of intrinsic meaning. At this point of his effort, man stands face to face with the irrational. He feels within him his longing for happiness and for reason, Camus writes. The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. For Sartre, our wants and projects, however anguished, are what lend our lives direction and urgency. Desire spurs us to act, to create, to leap toward the future. For Camus, desire is an affirmation of the value and beauty of life in the face of the absurd. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. It is a testament to our capacity to choose, to ascribe value, to strive and to assert our existence in an enigmatic universe. We confront both the burdens and the possibilities of our freedom. In the landscape of modern capitalism and consumer culture, desire has taken on new dimensions and significance. The relationship between desire and consumer culture has been extensively studied from multiple perspectives. Empirical research in consumer psychology suggests that consumer desires arise from complex interactions between individual psychology, social conditions, and marketing influences. Historical analyses, such as Jackson Lear's Fables of Abundance, document specific changes in advertising strategies and consumer behavior in industrialized societies since the late 19th century. However, debates continue about the extent to which consumer desires are manufactured versus emerging from pre-existing human tendencies. Studies in evolutionary psychology suggest that many consumer desires build upon evolved psychological mechanisms. Herbert Marcuse, in his book One-Dimensional Man, said that for the single consumer, desire as a live phenomenon may pertain to only a small number of objects in the daily life. However, the experience of passionately desiring such objects is critically informative for the study of consumption. For it shows how we are still enchanted and desire to be enchanted, despite the jading that occurs in a culture of abundance, and it provides glimpses of the restless energy with which most of us pursue the development of our consumption possibilities. Our finding that in consumer societies, consumer desires entail hope and are vitally energizing also explains the despair of people who cannot afford hopeful desire. Exposed to a consumer society where desiring is life-affirming, those who can neither afford nor hope to consume must either resolve to not desire or else let consumption exist only in magic and fantasy. This gives a new meaning to relative deprivation in its encounter with enchantment. This passionate desire, although deeply personal, is profoundly shaped by the cultural and economic context of consumerism. Central to the consumerist ethos is the manufacturing and manipulation of desire through advertising. The phenomenology of desire reveals that in desiring we are drawn out of ourselves toward that which we do not yet possess. This ecstatic movement of transcendence constitutes the very essence of human existence, as a project always ahead of itself. Yet in this movement, we discover not only our incompleteness, but also our fundamental relatedness to that which we desire. As Yarly argues in his seminal work, The Codes of Advertising, advertising operates by associating products with pre-existing social and cultural meanings, thereby transforming them into symbolic vessels of desire. By linking commodities to aspirational images of status, success, beauty, and happiness, advertising creates a powerful narrative in which consumption becomes the path to self-realization and fulfillment. As Jung asserts in Captains of Consciousness, advertising serves not so much to advertise products as to promote consumption as a way of life. The industrial system is profoundly dependent on commercial pornography for its stability. Advertising is only efficacious as a manipulation of deep libidinal patterns, the false identification of sexual fulfillment with consumption of commodities, requires a massive diffusion of sexually charged images to maintain an inevitably inadequate level of satisfaction with an expanding flow of goods and services. Wrote Herbert Marcuse in the book One-Dimensional Man, in a consumer society, the pursuit of material goods becomes inextricably linked to the pursuit of status and identity. As Belk, Ger and Kierkegaard note, the despair of people who cannot afford hopeful desire is a stark reminder of the inequities of consumer society. For those excluded from the promise of consumerist fulfillment, desire becomes a source of alienation and disempowerment. Even for those who can participate in the cycle of consumption, the endless pursuit of desire can lead to a sense of disenchantment and emptiness. Baudrillard argues in The Consumer Society, the proliferation of consumer goods leads to a fundamental mutation in the ecology of the human species, in which the accumulation of commodities replaces more authentic forms of human interaction and fulfillment. By manufacturing and manipulating desire, consumerism transforms the most intimate and personal of human impulses into an engine of economic growth and social stratification. The promise of fulfillment and the spectre of alienation, the pursuit of status and the emptiness of materialism. The existential psychotherapist Rollo May, in his book Love and Will, explored the relationship between desire and the human capacity for choice and commitment. For May, desire is not just a biological or psychological phenomenon, but an existential one, rooted in our fundamental freedom and responsibility as human beings. Authentic desire involves a kind of courageous openness to the world, a willingness to embrace both the joy and the pain of existence. In the postmodern era, thinkers like Félix Guattari and Gilles Deleuze have developed a radical theory of desire as a productive and revolutionary force, challenging traditional notions of lack and repression. For Deleuze and Guattari, desire is not a negative or reactive phenomenon, but a positive and creative one, capable of generating new forms of subjectivity and social relations. Their concept of the desiring machine suggests that desire is not just an individual experience, but a collective and impersonal one, flowing through the social body and its various assemblages. Capitalism, for example, is seen as a giant desiring machine that channels and exploits the flows of desire for its own ends, while also producing new forms of desire and subjective experience. This postmodern perspective on desire has important implications for politics and social change. Rather than seeing desire as something to be regulated or suppressed, Deleuze and Guattari invite us to explore its transformative and liberatory potentials, tapping into the flows of creativity and innovation that are always already at work in the world. Of course, no discussion of desire in the contemporary world would be complete without considering the ways in which it is shaped by consumer culture and the logic of capitalism. As theorists like Herbert Marcuse and Jean Baudrillard have argued, modern advertising and mass media create artificial needs and desires, manipulating our wants and longings for the sake of profit and social control. The constant bombardment of images and messages telling us what to want and how to live can lead to a kind of flattening or homogenization of desire, as we are encouraged to conform to pre-packaged lifestyles and identities. At the same time, the endless cycle of consumption and obsolescence can leave us feeling empty and dissatisfied, always chasing after the next new thing. In this context, the cultivation of authentic and meaningful desire becomes a kind of political and spiritual resistance. By learning to question and disengage from the false desires promoted by consumer culture, we can begin to reconnect with our deeper longings and passions, and to imagine alternative ways of living and relating to the world around us. This process of questioning and reimagining is at the heart of the resistance to capitalist realism, the idea, developed by theorists like Mark Fisher, that capitalism presents itself as the only viable economic and social system. 40. By challenging this notion and exploring alternative forms of desire and motivation, we can begin to create cracks in the edifice of capitalist realism and open up new spaces of possibility and transformation. Ultimately, the question of what we truly desire is a deeply personal and existential one, shaped by our individual histories, cultures, and circumstances. At the same time, it is also a profoundly social and political question, connected to the ways in which our desires are shaped and influenced by the world around us. As we navigate the complexities and contradictions of desire in the 21st century, it is more important than ever to cultivate a kind of critical self-awareness and reflective engagement with our own wants and longings. By bringing our desires into dialogue with our deepest values and aspirations, we can begin to transform them into a force for personal and collective growth, creativity, and change. This process of self-reflection and dialogue is at the heart of the Revelato journey, which invites us to explore the full spectrum of human desire and motivation, from the biological to the spiritual, the personal to the political. By engaging with the rich tapestry of philosophical, psychological, and cultural perspectives on desire, we can begin to weave a new narrative of meaning and purpose for our time. The philosopher Erich Fromm argues, in modern society we have lost not only meaning and purpose, but even desire. The first task people must perform is to resuscitate their capacity to want, to desire, to long for. Only if people experience want as a result of their healthy human nature will they then be able to create new social institutions apt to satisfy their needs and longings. The time has come for us to resuscitate our capacity to want, to desire, to long for a world that is more just, compassionate, and beautiful. By tapping into the transformative power of desire and aligning it with our highest ideals and aspirations, we can begin to create a new renaissance of the human spirit, a rebirth of hope and possibility for the future. So let us ask ourselves once again, what do we truly desire? And let us have the courage and creativity to pursue those desires with all our hearts, minds, and souls, knowing that therein lies the key to our deepest fulfillment and the healing of the world.